For much of the UK, it's dry, it's bright, 8 or 9 Celsius in the north, 9 to 11 in the south. But for southern counties of England, for South Wales, generally M4 corridor southwards, the afternoon turns fairly damp as the next front moves in from the southwest. And the rain turns persistent for a time during Tuesday night for southwest England, for much of Wales. Light on and off outbreaks of rain for central and southern England and for Northern Ireland. But for Scotland, it stays clear, and that means another frosty start on Wednesday. But a bright blue skies start the day for much of Scotland. The breeze picks up in the north and the west through the day. Winds almost touching gale force for exposed parts of the Western Isles. And then the cloud and the rain in the south move north. And I think Thursday also looks like a cloudy and damp day. But the sunshine returns for the weekend.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good evening, I'm Simon Evans, and very shortly we'll be presenting Headliners with Nick and Sajila here. We'll be taking a look at Tuesday's newspapers. But first, here are the news headlines with Miranda.
Thank you. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Talks to reach a ceasefire in Ukraine with Russia have ended, with the two sides agreeing to hold a second round of talks in the next few days. Earlier today, Ukraine's president signed a formal request to join the European Union, with Poland's foreign minister saying they'll support the accession process. Boris Johnson has told President Zelensky more UK support is on its way as shelling in Ukraine's major cities continues. Latest satellite images show Russian forces moving closer towards Kiev. Well, this comes ahead of the Prime Minister's trip to Estonia and Poland tomorrow, where he says the UK will put maximum pressure on President Putin. Boris Johnson says Vladimir Putin must fail and will feel the consequences after attacking Ukraine. Mr. Johnson will meet with Warsaw and Tallinn leaders, as well as visit British troops serving in Estonia. Well, speaking at the United Nations General Assembly, the EU's UN Ambassador Olof Skog says Europe hasn't seen this much violence in nearly 80 years.
Russia's actions grossly violate international law and are in clear breach of the UN Charter and the OSCE Helsinki Final Act, as well as Russia's specific commitments to respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is arguably the biggest aggression in Europe since the end of the Second World War.
Well, earlier today, the Pentagon's John Kirby, Sorry, we've got a technical problem. Pentagon's press secretary John Kirby said a peaceful diplomatic outcome is still an option for President Putin.
There's nothing other than perhaps his own obstinance of preventing Mr. Putin from doing the right thing here and to trying to find a way to stop this war, to de-escalate the tensions, and to re-engage in some sort of diplomatic, peaceful path forward. Now we'll see if that can bear out. It clearly doesn't appear to be the path he wants to choose.
Well, back home, and the Foreign Secretary says President Putin's invasion of Ukraine is not proceeding to plan. Liz Truss said the UK will impose further sanctions against Moscow and told MPs there'll be a full asset freeze on all Russian banks within days.
He expected to take cities quickly. He expected Ukraine to retreat, and he expected the West to be divided. Instead, his forces were met by the heroism of President Zelensky and the resolute determination of the Ukrainian people. He has been met by a united West, together with our friends around the world, and we have taken decisive action.
At least 11 people were killed during rocket strikes by Russian forces in Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv. Earlier, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the violence is totally unacceptable.
Yesterday, Russian nuclear forces were put on high alert. This is a chilling development. The mere idea of a nuclear conflict is simply inconceivable. Nothing can justify the use of nuclear weapons.
Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. You're up to date. Now it's back to headliners.
Hello and welcome to Headliners. Joining me tonight are the wonderful Sajila Kershi and the questionable Nick Dixon. I don't write the headlines. How are you both? Are you all right?
I was until a minute ago.
I know. It's disgraceful the way they try and belittle you, isn't it? I don't endorse that.
They have to try and keep me down. They fear me.
It's divide and rule. It's the game the producers play with any panel. There's always got to be an odd one out. And I guess, I'm forming a natural alliance with Sajila. I guess that's the upside of the whole thing.
Oh, I guess I thought I was going to be, because I'm the girl.
This is the way they're trying to create balance the whole time, but somebody is always going to fall through the cracks. Have you had a good week anyway so far? It's Monday.
Well, apart from the impending threat of nuclear war, I'm chilling.
Are you still sleeping through it, though? Are you sleeping through it?
Sleep is okay, but then you wake up in the morning and then on Twitter it's all,
the screaming, avoid the Twitter until you've had your second coffee at the moment.
Exactly.
I find I sleep through it fine. I don't know, when the world is on fire, my own personal problems seem to retreat a little bit. I actually need it. I feel it like balances my life out a little bit more.
My problem was watching David Starkey's analysis just before bed, because it's pretty bleak. It's very, very brilliant, but very bleak.
Well, let's take a look at the front pages of tomorrow's Tuesday's paper. Some people will be watching early on Tuesday morning. We start with the Daily Mail, and they are going with humanity, which is a reference to the record-breaking generosity of mail readers. Apparently, they've raised over £1 million in just 2 days for Ukraine and Putin's inhumanity. That's a picture of some tower blocks, I think, on fire there. The Telegraph next, and show this to Putin. We will be covering that story. That is what the newspapers, of course, like, the sort of human face of the devastation. They've picked out a young girl who is terribly tragic victim of all this atrocity. Independent has allies fear Putin will turn to indiscriminate attacks. If he doesn't make the progress he's hoping to, he might ramp up the artillery. Tuesday's Guardian have Russia's deadly raids defy sanctions and peace talks. The Financial Times, Russian rockets pound Kharkiv. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I've been learning some new pronunciations over the last couple of weeks. The Times, barbaric strikes on Ukraine. Metro has show this to Putin, the same story and indeed the same photograph that we saw earlier on the Telegraph, I believe. And finally, the Daily Star, get your tank off my land. The moment a cheeky farmer nicks Putin's 12-ton armoured vehicle and gets it off. That's the headlines. We'll be looking at them very shortly. So we start, Nick, with Tuesday's Telegraph, although it's a story that's in several of the papers. This is about the desperately sad story of a young girl, a victim of the indiscriminate bombing and shelling.
Yeah, very sad. It's this headline in the Telegraph is horror pictures show girl 6 in unicorn pajamas who died in Russian airstrike. As doctor says, show this to Putin, as we see there in the picture. So obviously, horrific story. I mean, these kind of stories are going to lose any support the Russian people might have for this, so I doubt they are particularly on board anyway. I mean, I don't know if Putin will care if he'll just claim it's propaganda or something. That seems to be his usual tactic.
Well, I don't suppose an individual photograph like that will find its way into Russia. I don't know whether they have control over the internet or quite what level of sort of propaganda grip they've got on things. I was reading actually listening to an audiobook over the weekend called The Road to Unfreedom, a chap called Timothy Snyder, who's a bit of an expert on the region, and he was talking about the extraordinary level of news manipulation that Putin was capable of in the previous sort of invasion in 2014. Remember, they shot down the Malaysian jet airliner, which was an extraordinary outrage, and the extent to which they managed to persuade the Russian people that it had been brought down by Ukrainian forces, and indeed had been an attempt on Putin's life. I mean, they to say shameless is hardly begins to cover it.
Well, in some ways, it's the first social media war, isn't it? Yeah. You know, COVID was the first social media pandemic. Now, I find it incredibly hard, even going through Twitter, to find out what is real.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I saw my consultant today, who's half Ukrainian and half Russian, and he had a lot to say on this. Not sure that I agree with him. But sadly, going
half Ukrainian, half Russian.
Half Ukrainian, half Russian.
Wow.
He's actually very pro-Putin and thinks that Putin's been misunderstood. But the thing is, going back to the photo, sadly, this is going to be one of so many to come. And that's what happens in conflict. You know, that's what happens in war. Innocent children and, you know, people will die. And I just kind of like, I'm a bit like, I wish the West had done a little bit more to, I guess nobody took him serious, and I get that, but I wish we could have talked him down.
Well, I think to be fair, the American armed forces seem to be taking him seriously. In fact, to be absolutely honest, I think on this programme we weren't sure how seriously to take it. There was a degree of sense that we've seen forces mass on borders before now as a means of getting some leverage on negotiations. But
yeah, well, some pretty serious commentators were sort of underestimating Putin's ability to just do this kind of thing. That's why Starkey's analysis, like I say, he sees Putin as just a czar who's in line with Peter the Great, who will just carry on expanding if you let him.
Right. Well, Snyder, who is currently in my head, you know, until I read the next book, but he was going on about, there's a philosopher who influenced Lenin, I think his name was Ilyin, and he had quite an extraordinary view, which apparently Putin has said is his favourite philosopher stroke historian, a kind of conceptual notion of Russia as a great and almost like a single entity, an organism which must not be violated and which forces anything outside of it amounts to fascism, even though, of course, you would probably say that Putin himself was a lot closer to the traditional constituent parts of a fascist regime, you know, what he runs, but they regard fascism as anything that tries to break up and divide Russia. And, of course, a border between Russia and Ukraine is seen in those terms. It's pretty terrifying if he really is operating on that level of delusion. It's almost like a religious ideology, really, about the nature of Russia herself.
Yeah, I see what you mean with delusion, although I do think it's dangerous to start calling him mad and all these things. I think it's just a lack of understanding. He's just an old-school leader who just wants to take what can be taken. That's a paraphrase from the Jack Reacher movie, but that's kind of how I see him at the moment.
What is your pro-Putin... You say a consultant, you mean a professional relationship?
My mythologist consultant, if you're watching, hello. He thinks that we are reacting to an action that was carried out, you know, years ago, and that no one's really listened to Putin what he wants, and also the fact that the countries around him were going to be given nuclear arms, and he didn't, you know. So I don't know. Like you say, I don't know what to believe.
He wanted Ukraine to remain a buffer state. He wanted Ukraine to remain a buffer state Putin, and that was violated, and he's been indicating he's unhappy about that.
He was very unhappy, and he said he couldn't get. He said all the news outlets that he was trying to get hold of news about his family back there, Russia Today and stuff. He couldn't access. So I don't know if we've stopped it, or which is a bit worrying. Because we should have access to all news at the moment.
There are obviously those people who go back and say, look, when it was Yeltsin, he wanted to join NATO. Perhaps we could have been less, aggressive after the fall of the Soviet Union. There are those people that make those arguments, but if you make them now, people get very, obviously, you sort of get called a traitor because we're in the heat of the battle now.
Well,
this
is true. You have two different modes, don't you? And once the war starts, you have to sort of put the hypotheticals aside. But there are some very serious voices who have been saying for some time that NATO should never have been pushing up to those borders. Tuesday's Guardian now, and this is another aspect, another dimension of the resistance, I suppose you would call it. I hope you've not been hoarding rubles, Sajila. They look like they're a bad bet.
They are a bad bet. So Russia's central bank doubles interest rates and closes stock market as ruble plunges. It's gone from 9.5% to 20%, highest in almost 20 years. Wow. And of course, it is due to the
that was enough to bring Norman Lamont down, wasn't it, in 1994? So.
Yeah. I mean, the central bank said the hike is designed to offset the increased risk of the ruble depreciation and inflation. Now, I've said all this. I haven't got a clue what I'm talking about. I've just researched all this because I have no clue about their finances. However, I'm worried, more importantly, how the severe economic sanctions will affect the ordinary people of Russia. And that really worries me. Like, I mean, they could wipe out their savings in a moment. We've seen the queues of people queuing up at, cash machines, like trying to get all their money out.
And they've had a rubbish few. I mean, for the last decade, I think something like it's gone from roughly 30 rubles to the dollar to 70 rubles to the dollar, something like that. Yeah, just due to gradual sort of failure of the Russian economy. So this isn't going to help that.
No,
obviously.
The ruble fell 30% to a record low against the dollar before the intervention, and later eased to stand 20% down. I mean, it's.
The thing about the Russian economy is, but I think it's fairly sort of obvious and predictable, is that it exports vast amount of fairly sort of raw energy, gas and oil and so on, and imports virtually all its manufactured goods. Almost everything that's made is sort of brought in, or indeed tools to build things from. So any decline in its ability to use its foreign exchange to buy stuff, is catastrophic. It has virtually no capacity to just go, we'll make our own. They don't have that option.
But it's going to affect. It's not going to affect Putin. This is the thing. We're trying to put sanctions in place so that. But he doesn't care about his people.
He might care more about the wealthy, who even the Swiss banks now, I think, for the very first time since the Second World War, have come on board with European sanctions. Have you looked into this?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked into the Swiss banks, but the question of whether he cares and whether this will actually affect his ability, because if he has this massive military, I mean, I've heard 500 billion war chest. If he really has that and doesn't care about his people and just wants to expand, then obviously, but some of this stuff might actually hit his ability to actually act. That's the question.
You've got to be able to pay your soldiers. That's right. I mean, people always underestimate how expensive war is. I say people, with civilians who don't get involved with it, and this is often how these things collapse. It's often the more boring aspect of war that isn't discussed when people think of great victories and battles that are won and tactical and strategic nous. But actually, very often it's the ability to continue to fund it. To throw fuel on the fire that is decisive ultimately, even for somebody like Putin, I think. Yeah. And if there is a complete loss of morale in Russia, that will get. Even a dictator. Obviously, he's not. He's not facing a tough election in a couple of years. But there is still there's a limit to just how far you can marshal millions of people to do your bidding if the tide turns against him. You look.
No, I'm just thinking it's really sad that we're having to. We're having to use the ordinary people to kind of get to our target.
Sajila up for assassination. Now, Tuesday's Times. Are you tempted to become a modern-day Orwell or Hemingway or Oz Chatterjee, perhaps? Nick, go in there. Freedom fighters on the...
I wondered what you were talking about for a minute. I thought you mean my writing, but no, it was...
Fighting in the Spanish Civil War. That was the last time there were serious voluntary forces.
Yeah, and this is about that. This is Britain's wannabe vigilantes told to join the army instead. So vigilantes, who get a bad rap sometimes, have offered to go out and fight in Ukraine. And Liz Truss, who isn't shy of giving an opinion.
They'd be mercenaries, wouldn't they? Rather than vigilantes is more against crime rather than in a war.
Well, we don't know if they're getting paid. If they're doing it voluntarily, they're vigilantes.
Right.
You know what I mean? If mercenaries, if they're just doing it for money, but if they're doing it for a cause,
fair enough.
Maybe I'm just. Who am I to argue with you?
Semantics, anyway.
Yes.
Liz Truss, she's behind this.
She said, "Get out there, and if you like, why not?" But the Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, has thrown up caution, saying, "No, probably don't go out with no training to Ukraine. Better idea is join the British Army if you want to help out." So that's what happened. It's another sort of Liz Truss minor gaffe. I mean, she's known for these minor gaffes, like she didn't know geography recently, but she will give an opinion. That's one thing. She's not shy of giving an opinion.
Absolutely. Do you have an opinion on that, Sajila?
Only that I think the people that are going to go over and fight there are probably just ones that want to have a quick fight in the pub and missed that from lockdown and just going to go over there. Yeah, I can take him on. Come on then.
It's good morale boosting, though, isn't it? When Avengers assemble. Brief break from World War III before the break to discuss a missed opportunity to prevent the Grenfell Tower catastrophe. I mean, it's just relentless, isn't it, at the moment? But anyway, this one's in Tuesday's Guardian. Sajila.
Oh, gosh. OK, so the fire safety official admits tests showed cladding danger 15 years before Grenfell. This will anger many, including myself. Senior officials admitted that the government knew 15 years before the Grenfell Tower disaster that plastic-filled cladding panels which fuelled the fatal fire and burned fast and fierce. And he believes that they should never have been used in tall buildings. Of course, we know this. And just to remind people that 72 innocent people lost their lives in that 24-storey flat because of this. So is there some sense it was suppressed, this report, or they looked the other way, or they said, ignore it, or was it fumbled? I mean, they're saying it wasn't a cover-up, but the taxpayer-funded tests showed the cladding panels failed catastrophically, with flames reaching 20 metres in the air. So obviously
20 metres from the panel.
Yeah,
wow.
But I mean, we all saw it on our screens.
Yeah.
It was horrific. People burning alive, and someone has got to take accountability. And I think the government, if they did hide this, because they didn't want to do
if they
all the
hid
paperwork,
it would be appalling.
It's horrific, and I hope that the victims and their families will get the justice that they need from this.
Anything you want to say about that?
Well, not really, other than it's not in this piece, it was in another one I read, but there was a question of whether it didn't come out because of concerns about the cladding industry, or whether it was actually, as someone else suggested, a sort of bureaucratic falling through the cracks, which is a more benign explanation.
Yes, but still, I mean, things fall through the cracks, but there are things and things, aren't there?
Yes,
that feels like
neither is ideal.
Should have been given some sort of asterisk. Anyway, that's it for part one. Join us after the break. We'll be discussing Matt Hancock's romantic side, The Old Man and the Sea, and supermarket yellow stickers as a diet protocol. See you there.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Headliners with me, Simon Evans, Sajila Kershi and Nick Dixon. So in Tuesday's Mirror, we have a tale of iconic defiance. Some sailors on who showed a degree of defiance to a Russian battleship that we're not allowed to exactly paraphrase.
Right. Well, I actually talked about it the other night on Headliners. It was that they said, Snake Island sailors who told warship, go F yourself, alive and taken prisoner. So the story the other day was that they'd all died and they were going to get a sort of posthumous award for bravery. But now they're saying, actually, they've been captured, although captured illegally, though I doubt Putin particularly cares about that element, and now they're alive. So this is what I said before. I mean, I certainly don't want to doubt the sort of bravery of these soldiers of Israel, but this is the thing where you can't really tell what's real at the moment, because we're told they all died, now they're alive. Yeah. And it's this thing about, if you look at some of the tweets coming out of Ukraine, the obvious propaganda is unbelievable. I mean, we've crushed Russia day one and stuff. And people, I've never seen this many, blatantly ridiculous tweets, and I follow Gary Lineker, but it's I don't actually, but so it's quite hard to find out. I don't want to be the person saying, they didn't do this very brave thing, but it is interesting how quick information is changing.
There is propaganda on both sides, true. There was an image, a little bit of video that everyone was sharing for ages, which turned out to be from a Palestinian girl showing defiance to an Israeli.
That's the thing.
From about 5 years ago.
And because people at the moment, of course, they want to support Ukraine, there's a lot of sort of gullibility online where people are sharing something from a completely different time and place, saying, look at this brave thing, and it's got 50,000 likes.
In exactly the same way that we were saying, some people are going, it's not going very well for them. They're not making as much progress as you would think. Other people are going, it's pretty good progress. Actually,
right, I know.
It's as good as...
And there are those, at least on my section of the internet, that say the whole thing is a psyop and not really happening.
Wow.
Yes, I mean, that might be my corner of the internet, but I don't go as far as that. I merely say this is a very brave story. I hope they're all right, and I hope.
Just the fact that they live somewhere called Snake Island makes them pretty brave, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
I mean, that wouldn't be.
It's a sort of
something we had of Robert Louis Stevenson.
Yeah, it's a sort of key strategic point for Russia to get much more access to naval waters, and it just happens to also have an enticing name, Snake Island, or a name you'd want to get away from. I don't know.
So, Sajila, we have a story from The Guardian now, which is some background to obviously a lot of fossil fuels is a major part of the Ukrainian invasion story.
Well, the IPCC issues bleakest warning yet on impacts of climate breakdown. So we've had pandemic, we've had storms, floods, and I saw these beautiful 4 horses on a hillside. And the men...
Behold a pale rider.
And they were shouting, I'm getting out of here. We all want to get out of here. So climate breakdown is accelerating rapidly. I think we all know that. Many of the impacts will be more severe than predicted. And of course, animals will be extinct. We've had like freak weather. It's all kinds of climate breakdown. Pandas are not mating because they spend hours eating, and so obviously maybe they're gender neutral. I don't know, but it's all.
Pandas have been getting a bad press for the pandemic.
Pandemo.
It's besmirching them. I am very sceptical about the extreme weather event narrative. I am not necessarily sceptical about the IPCC. I'm sure they are acting bona fides. But for instance, that thing, it was only, what was it called? Storm, I can't remember it now. Eunice, which was, I mean, I'm sure a few people had isolated experiences that were very upsetting or costly and so on. But I mean, we live on the south coast. I live about half a mile off from the beach on Brighton. I went down there really expecting to see something. It was all right. It wasn't that bad. There was a few pebbles on the promenade. It was cleared off the next day by the council. I think they egg everything up so much now that I think it actually builds scepticism about the whole thing.
But then there are countries in the world where, in Pakistan, there's a town which, it was so hot that people are just dropping dead because they couldn't even go. It was boiling, so they literally burning to death with the heat. And so the reality is that we probably aren't facing the worst of it.
No.
We're moaning about a little bit of, rain.
I don't know. You're dubious about the whole thing, are you?
Well, I was going to say, as for Eunice, I mean, there were some serious incidents, but there's been this Pandora's box now of stupidity where someone called into radio and said there should be a lockdown for the storm. The government should get involved. As for this thing, I just think the amount of bleak stories coming out now. Remember, Fukuyama said it was the end of history in '92. Yes. My theory, replacing that, is that it's all of history happening at once. We've currently got World War II, the Cold War, plague, and now the climate change.
It has been a seamless parade, isn't it? The degree to which Brexit handed over to COVID, handed over to World War.
Well, this is why the people on my Twitter say it's all planned, you see. It's a bit too convenient, they say.
Finally, we have some good news now. Matt Hancock really was in love, it turns out. So that's a cheerful twist to what had seemed like an office affair. Maybe he still is in love.
Yes. Well, this was Matt Hancock on the Diary of a CEO podcast, and I watched most of it before the show. He actually came across surprisingly well, given what you expect from Matt Hancock. It's a pretty low bar I was starting with. Yeah. The only part he bothered me is when he said he made reference to some of the most amazing brains in the world, like Chris Whitty. He lost me there, although I'm sure he has a very big brain. But he was doing quite well, Hancock, till he got to this question of the incident, and the interviewer tried to ask it. The interview started by saying, well, you talked about guidance against casual sex, and then you did this. And Hancock sort of stops and goes, are you going to ask the question more respectfully? Are you going to rephrase that question?
Right.
And he keeps saying, yeah, we'll just start this section again, not grasping that in the podcast world, they're broadcasting all of this. So he tries about 4 times to say, let's just start that section again. It's like, Hancock, we can see you saying this. So it was incredibly bad. So that the facade fell apart.
So he really didn't want the term casual sex to apply to this.
Exactly. And it was pure partridge that moment. It was pure accidental partridge. And he hated that term. Can I just say, as a wider point on this, Simon, you may or may not agree with me here, but I think you might. When the Hancock thing happened, everyone rushed to say straight away, I don't care what he does in his private life, it's the rule breaking that I cared about. I thought that was very strange that we've fallen so far morally that we want to rush to state that we don't care about someone having an extramarital affair, which used to be
with loads of children involved, aren't
6 children involved. It used to be that moral duty took primacy, and now it's liberal self-indulgence, and not to the point where everyone's rushing to say, I don't care what he does, he can do what he likes. I just care about the rules being broken.
That's a fair observation. I don't know necessarily whether I endorse it or not.
I tried to get you on board with it.
Well, no, I do think I would probably have some more sympathy for actually we were in love, it wasn't casual sex, if the CCTV hadn't literally caught him groping her butt. That was the problem, wasn't it? I think the unflattering shot of the rather sort of
I think that's what made it look sordid.
Yes.
But actually, if he did fall in love, and he says that's why he lost his job, he's in good company, isn't he? Because, let's face it, Harry, when he met Meghan, lost his job.
Yes.
Edward,
I thought you meant under lockdown.
Mrs. Wallace lost his job.
That was more voluntary on Harry's part.
Puts down having his marital, although he wasn't married.
This isn't going to be the Labrador,
yeah,
is it?
she was married, but he had a child, and he's the paternity suit. That was what kind of made him resign eventually. So people losing their jobs over falling in love, and even a quick rope, is not.
I know quite a few people who split up under lockdown because they just realised they couldn't manage to spend so much time with each other. So I think under those circumstances, either you fall in love or you realise you hate each other. Yeah.
The other, to be very, very fair to Matt Hancock, he's pointing out he's known her for years, so it wasn't a casual thing, and they're work colleagues, and they've known each other many, many years. So that's what he's saying.
And she was coaching him about how to. It was like a media presentation skills thing.
Apparently, it was how to be more.
Which he clearly hasn't been paying attention to.
Well, she was telling him how to be more emotionally communicate better, which is interesting.
Which he's failed to do on the podcast. The irony. We move on to Tuesday's Sun now, and a story that was this a clumsy gesture or something more sinister, Sajila? Something slightly...
Okay, so a woman says she was devastated at her 12-week scan when medics handed her an abortion leaflet. Now, this is a hospital in Lincoln where she went. She went on her own because her husband couldn't come, and she has her scan, her 12-week scan, and they say that very insensitively say, oh, there's something wrong with the baby. There's a genetic condition that that will affect the baby, and then basically jump in with this leaflet to say that she
This is what comes next.
which is a frightening thing. The smallest thing, as you know, we know if you've had pregnant partners and whatever, and if it's so frightening to have a small thing going on, let alone be told this.
Yeah.
They then paid to go and have privately to get a second opinion, and just as well they did, because what they found out was their baby actually had Down syndrome, which is quite common. It doesn't mean to say you have to abort the baby. And they said they wouldn't have had Poppy, the daughter, if they hadn't.
So they have had her, and she does have Down syndrome.
She does have Down syndrome.
But they had been. They'd indicated it was something more serious than that, something that would have been.
Well, it was just the way they handled it. I think, to go from here's your scan, there's something wrong, without even having a diagnosis. It's worrying. And the Lincoln Hospital that has been asked for a comment, they've basically not given a comment. They just said we can't talk about individual cases.
What do you think, Nick?
Well, I think they leapt far too quickly to suggest abortion, which troubles me on two levels. One is the level where some of our sort of liberal, rationalist secularism borders on eugenics sometimes, when people think there's going to be any problem. Then we get towards a designer babies thing we might be covering later. But then the fact that we're that quick to suggest abortion bothers me as well, because I think it should be more of a last resort than a first offer.
You should be presented with the options in as, I suppose, what we call it, as moral value-free a sort of tone as possible, shouldn't you? I suppose most people working in the hospital sector would be trained and more sensitive. Otherwise, these stories would emerge all the time. But must have been extraordinarily upsetting to just be immediately presented with that as a fait accompli.
Yeah, terrible. And they thought, if they thought there was a safety issue, if there really is a safety issue. Yeah. But other than that, I think it should be an absolute last resort.
But Nick, they gave that information in like two pieces of really serious information.
No, it's terrible.
In one go, when she's just had a scan with your most vulnerable.
No, I agree.
And you just want to be told that the baby's okay. I think that's shocking.
No, I think it was terrible. I totally agree.
And in the Times, we have a story in a similar sort of territory to some extent, which is, but perhaps slightly more positive, but still with that slightly, as you say, that sort of tinge of what's, what exactly is this information going to be used for? Go on.
Yes, that eugenic-y vibe.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Full genome sequencing at birth to spot rare diseases. It's in the Times. So the idea is that there are rare diseases. Many people have them. Apparently 1 in 17 will develop a rare disease. It doesn't sound that rare to me, but it's quite troubling. And the whole idea is you'll be able to help people easier by sequencing the whole genome. And of course, yes, the obvious flip side is you start to think of designer babies, transhumanism, and it starts to be the sort of thing that to me feels inevitable, yet the kind of thing I'll fight to the death in one of my lost causes.
It's the classic slippery slope, isn't it? Because you just say, we're going to scan the embryos, we'll identify these things that nobody would want to have this baby. You couldn't possibly. This is an absolute, not a viable thing, and then it just gradually creeps along and further and further and further. And it was interesting. You're talking about the Down syndrome, and I would agree with you. It certainly should be up to the parents, of course, to decide. But the reality is 90% abort when they are told that now. And that varies from country to country. There are some countries where it's gone to virtually, universal now.
If they're not carrying a boy, then they'll abort. But, in a disposable consumerist kind of world, this has gone too far, where we're now going to get rid of babies that are not perfect. And it is worrying.
Absolutely.
Very, very Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Do you remember The Boys from Brazil?
Oh, yes. I always felt that could have been a better movie, yeah. Gregory Peck, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I didn't like his later movies. I like him in black and white. Well, listen, that's the end of part 2. You know the deal by now. Adverts coming up. We will then be discussing social distancing in the bunker, everlasting canines, and Tutankhamun's dagger. See you very shortly.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Headliners. I'm Simon Evans, and joining me are Lady in Red, Sajila Kershi, and whatever the opposite of the man from Del Monte is, Nick Dixon. It's just rude.
I know, I don't even get that one, luckily.
Well, the man from Del Monte used to advertise tinned fruit, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Peaches and things.
Del Monte, you say.
He was a man who visited sort of vineyards and things and selected the best fruit. He was usually dressed in a white linen suit and a Panama hat.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, I guess they're just saying you're dressed in sort of dark clothing. But
I see.
You should go. You should
Pretty
go
weak stuff.
I might get your agent to have a word with them. Tuesday's Mail. Good to see bunker guidelines are being updated, Sajila.
Okay. So
what is going on here?
This is Daily Mail, remember, guys. So Biden administration is mocked for updating its nuclear attack guidelines to include social distancing and mask wearing at Russia as Russia remedies its missiles after Ukraine invasion. So this is, I mean, I know it's not funny, but okay. So they're saying that if there was, in the event of a nuclear attack, there is and I didn't know this until I read this, so there's a mushroom cloud.
Yes.
When it goes up, you've got 15 minutes before it goes down, and it goes up, must come down.
Right.
And in those 15 minutes, they advise you to rush home to wash off all the radioactive or whatever stuff that's on your body, whilst also getting all your family, making sure that they wear masks and that are socially distanced at 6 metres, but also ensuring that you're away from any exits or outside buildings. So it's in a concrete building. That in 15 minutes. So you're having a shower, doing all this.
You've got to sing Happy Birthday to me
and
twice
happy
while you're washing your hands. Yeah.
But the bacterial fluids won't work. The wipes don't work. But the 6 metres. I don't even have 6 metres between like one side of my flat to the other, so I don't know how that's going to work.
I mean, I've got to say, this was a conversation we used to have regularly when I was a kid. You know, this was your meat and drink in the sixth form block in the 1980s. I wouldn't want to survive it, would you?
I know what you mean. It'd be like Cormac McCarthy's The Road or something.
Yeah. I would just run out straight into the blast zone.
I believe you would. I've seen you running into the Brighton Sea. I can see you doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the new duck and cover, isn't it? It's absolutely absurd. There's the bit especially about make sure you're wearing a mask and 6 feet apart. And it reminded me of a tweet today I saw. It was the peace talk negotiations, and someone had tweeted, actually a Cambridge professor, I think, had tweeted, "I see no women, I see no masks. What could possibly go wrong?" So that was, I know, it's an incredible tweet. Wow. That was their main concern. Gary Lineker also had a tweet like, "I know there's stuff going on, guys, but what about climate change?" So these people are mental. It also reminded me of the old Blackadder bit, you might remember, when he says to Blackadder, "What should we do if we happen to tread on a landmine?" And he says, "Well, normal procedure is to jump 200 feet in the air and scatter yourself over a wide area." So it's that level of instruction, isn't it? Yes. And I also think it might be interesting, because I want to squeeze this in somewhere, that this is another sort of Biden is weak sort of story, because this is, it's Biden administration is mocked. So it does tie into that question, I don't know if we have time for it, but about, whether this would have happened with Trump. 62% of Americans think that if Trump was in this invasion, wouldn't have happened. And so it's very interesting to consider. And apparently the Russians consider Trump to be very unpredictable, and that's their problem, because they like to war game things out 50 years in advance. They have a 50-year strategy on whether they're going to go to war with the US, and they can't predict where, because he suddenly bombed Syria because he felt emotional about some pictures, and so he's a wild card.
Interesting one, isn't it? Because a lot of people do believe that Russia interfered with the American election in the hope of seeing Donald Trump win, but I think they did that in the hope that he would damage American unity, damage American prestige, damage America's sense of itself and its manifest destiny. I don't think he would necessarily have actually wanted to go to war with him at that point, though. Do you know what I mean? I think he would have actually been quite... It was kind of a long-term strategy, and arguably it did... I do think it's quite interesting as well that at the beginning of this conflict, there was quite a lot of talk generally about... were the armies of the West were obsessed with pronouns, with being, diversity and inclusion, and having battleships named after, famous San Franciscan gay icons and so on. There was this kind of sense that we're riddled with wokeness and consequently are not a decent fighting unit, and suddenly we're confronted with, an old enemy who's waited all this time and watched us weaken ourselves from within. That narrative seems to have evaporated in the last few days. I don't know whether that's been a deliberate attempt, but I think actually there's been a degree to which everyone's gone, oh no, actually we're okay.
It depends who you speak to, because I was watching the Trump CPAC speech, and he certainly hammered that point.
Yeah.
So, and we saw the MI6, as Dan Wootton was covering, the MI6 leader talking about that kind of thing. So it depends. Yeah. Depends where you look. But
well, it's interesting I'll just pick up what you just said about the fact that Trump was brought into power by the Russians, but then perhaps maybe
he
that's
wasn't,
interesting. But that's
that was the accusation.
But that's the interesting analogy. And it was like, well, okay, he'll just ruin America, and of course then he didn't, because they just loved him, and it's just like, oh well, we haven't won that war, so we're going to try something else. So I thought that's
it did, and also I will also say this, to the extent that, and I have no strong view about this, the extent to which Russian interference may have precipitated Brexit, but let's say it only needed a couple of percent, and maybe it's fine, maybe it didn't. But if it did, and if he thought that was going to dissolve our ability in Europe to present a united front, I think that has backfired as well, actually, because what has happened instead is that the United Kingdom has sort of stood outside of Europe, and there's been, I think, more kind of heated dialogue about whether, for instance, to impose the SWIFT restrictions on the banking regulations, which quite conceivably, if Britain had been within the EU, they wouldn't have been able to
put that pressure on.
You put that pressure on,
because Germany were the last to want to go along with it. But are you going to move on from this?
Yeah,
I was going to say one more Trump.
But the current geopolitical situation is still under scrutiny. FIFA and UEFA have stepped up, Nick, and this is your territory, I believe.
Of course, football. Yeah, get the northern guy on football. Yeah. Russia banned by FIFA and UEFA from all international football competitions. So FIFA imposed a suspension, which effectively cuts Russia out from the Men's World Cup and the Women's Euro 2022. Also, Spartak Moscow will be eliminated from the Europa League, where they were going to face RP Leipzig, who will now just go through instead. So, yeah, several countries put pressure on this. Sweden said they wouldn't play against Russia. Poland said they wouldn't. Czech Republic. And eventually it became clear that FIFA were just going to have to do this and ban Russia. And some people have pointed out, of course, the irony of the whole thing's in Qatar anyway. So it's not exactly the most ethical thing. It's like, sorry, you're banned from our slave games. You know what I mean? But, of course, that's an ethical consideration. This is more of a geopolitical stance. So it's pretty much inevitable. Now, will Putin care is a big question we could go back to. Probably not, except in a sense of pride, and it's more sanctions.
They have a previous ban, and they got around it, the Russian team, by calling themselves something else or something.
There was something about that, wasn't there? Yeah, where they used a different name.
It was, no.
I think it is.
That was an Olympic team that they went in under a different name, rather than a football team. But
I mean, I do feel sorry for the football players and the sportsmen that are banned from these things, because they didn't ask for this.
They're always at the sharp end. But on the other hand, they earn absurd amounts of money for
they
playing,
do, and they'll probably be fine. But there is a hypocrisy, because what I'd like to see is everybody banning to go to Qatar, for their human rights and women's rights abuses.
That would be lovely.
Because that would make a nice stand. Why don't you do that? So there is a little bit kind of, as you say, a little bit sort of touching on that.
On to The Guardian once more, and a little bit of poetry from me. I was the shadow of the waxwing slain by the false azure in the window pane. Do you know where that's from?
No.
The opening lines of Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov, about a bird killing itself flying into a window. This is concerns that we're building an urban hellscape for birds these days.
Dorset Police Shiny headquarters could pose a lethal threat to birds, say, at the council. So concerns have been raised by the Wool Parish Council that the proposed building's reflective drawings of sky, trees and clouds means that birds like house martins and swift colonies could fly into them and ultimately to their deaths. So that's quite sad, but I mean, it's great that they're thinking of building things that might do this. I don't have anything else to say on this.
It's tricky to keep them out. It does kill quite a lot. I think millions of birds are killed around the world, but even so, it pales next to the death toll of the domestic cat, I believe.
Interesting. How will nuclear war affect the birds as well? Does anyone know?
Will create some extraordinary photographic opportunities. Tuesday's Times, and I'll be honest, I was assuming this was going to be death in the afternoon. Graphic depictions of bullfighting, possibly Hills Like White Elephants, which is a short story about abortion, but no. Another Hemingway piece of fiction has got a trigger warning, Nick.
Yes, we're getting very literary tonight. I only got halfway through Pale Fire. I prefer Laughter in the Dark, but who cares? This Hemingway novel gets trigger warning, and yes, there's a trigger warning put on The Old Man and the Sea because it's been warned that it contains graphic fishing scenes.
I can't believe this. It feels like it's clickbait, this.
It does. It also feels like the nadir of Western civilization, but graphic fishing, apparently it's true.
And this is in Inverness, where they actually have a fishing fleet. This is in at the University of the Highlands in Scotland.
Yeah, that adds insult. I mean, and they compare it to other things where Frankenstein was flagged because it has violent murder and cruelty. I mean, at least that's something. It's better than fishing.
Frankenstein is a horror book. I mean, I wouldn't read the trigger warning, but there is a set. But The Old Man and the Sea is a beautiful elegiac story of an old man going out to sea after having not caught a fish for a long time, then catching one, but it's so huge he can't get it in his boat, and as he tries to bring it home, it's eaten by sharks.
It's a sort of allegory, yes.
Where is the trigger?
I don't know.
It's the graphic fishing. It's the treatment of the fish. Don't you understand?
In a shark's eye or something?
Yeah, the fish gets attacked by sharks. If you see, some of these people are more on the side of the sharks than they are humans.
The world is full of sharks, people. Come on. I mean, what's next? Like trigger warnings for the WI watching Downton Abbey because there may be graphic scenes of drinking pots of tea.
Yeah. And can I just add the further irony that The Old Man and the Sea was in a 1958 film and in a 1990 TV version, and both versions were given a U rating.
Yeah.
So this is how weak the new generation are.
Utterly, it's a lovely.
If they are, or if I don't know who makes
Mail
the
next,
decision.
new research. This may extend the length of dog years, Gina.
Oh, this is great news for dog lovers. It's a dog's life, but a pill could make your dog life last longer.
That's really good news if it's true. Like, regardless of what illness it might have?
I don't know about that, but medication may extend the average pooch's lifespan by a third. There's a drug called Rapacin, which could extend the average lifespan of dogs, according to US researchers.
Wow.
Obviously, the death of a dog, if anyone's had one, it's really tragic losing a family member. And now you can,
extend by a third. So large dogs usually live about 10 years, so they go to about 13, and a smaller dog can be a 13, 14. That could get up to a 20-year dog. Imagine that. You could use like 2 or 3 dogs to see you through most of your adult life.
Then you fall more in love with them, and the pain's even harder as they go.
You do like Dolly Parton and have your dog cloned every time it dies.
Oh yeah, that's a bit creepy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think there's a danger that it'll just stop people having?
Barbara Streisand. It might be Barbara Streisand. I mustn't like one of that. I think it's Streisand who does that. Yeah.
Do you think there's a danger people will just stop having kids if their dogs live this long? You know what I mean? So we need to get these birth rates up in the West, according to Elon Musk. So I'm a bit worried. Could just be
Funnily
me.
enough, there's a parallel story that while dogs enjoy longer lifespan for medication, human lifespan can be extended by walkies.
Nice. That's a good link. These are improving. Yes. This is about dementia. A brisk walk each day slashes your risk of developing Alzheimer's by a third. Now, what this is, it's saying, half an hour walk 5 days a week or 15-minute walk daily could be enough to slash the risk. So definitely do that, people. I'm not belittling that, but I am saying it's a little bit of a gimmick because the article is basically saying fitness is good for you. Yeah. Who knew? Everyone knows fitness is my life. So, you can ask me about it or read my article I wrote on Medium about my fitness journey. But yes, that's essentially what it is, Simon.
So it's a brisk walk.
Can you not tell?
Yeah. Have you lost weight recently?
I'm trying to, but I'm doing last week I did 3 strength sessions, 1 football match, 1 row and 1 run. So I'm just hitting it on all
When
fronts.
you do the strength, you mean heavy weights?
Yes, yeah. Deadlift, bench press.
What do you deadlift?
Deadlift, I'm on to 105. I did 110 the other day.
Not bad.
kg. Not bad. And bench, I'm on 80, which is apparently is all right. It's nothing. It's not crazy, but it's
benching 80.
80 kg.
That's not at all. That's more than I can do. I can deadlift that much, but I can't.
Well, you and me should go to the gym, Sam. The competition might increase.
Boys are speaking in spoke tongue.
What do you do, Sabine?
What do you bench?
I do walking, and I have to say that was one of the things that I found really frustrating during lockdown. I think actually dementia, I would not be surprised. I've seen some changes in family members. I think lockdown was hard.
Yeah.
Even just going for a walk, because it was, so scary and we're going to die if we come in contact with anyone. Just having a stretch of walk was hard. So I do think, dementia has definitely probably increased.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a brisk walk 5 times a week. Story from Tuesday's Times now is about a woman maddened by bells. I think this is campanophobia, I've decided to call this.
It?
Yeah, well, and the campanology is ringing bells.
Oh.
So it must be campanophobia, must be
well,
maddened by
the bells.
Is it a phobia, though? That's
the
good.
bells.
The bells, the bells.
The bells,
yeah.
Esmeralda. Or in this story, Esmeralda is Martine Wipra, a retired secretary who lives 5 metres from St Didier Church in
5 metres from the church?
5 metres from Didier Church. Is suing her
She
local
is asking
council.
for it. The church must have been there before she was, surely.
I mean, no, it has been. And so there is an hourly automatic tolling of the church bells in French. And if you go to France, I go quite a lot, they're actually a lovely sound.
Yeah.
However, I've got hearing aids, so I'm deaf, so I can take them out, and if I don't want to hear, I can take out. This poor woman couldn't. So she took on one resident and her 72 neighbours who actually think it's a lovely thing and should be. It's part of the rural sort of setting.
Yeah.
She suing her local council to have the bells silenced after she rejected as an insufficient judge ruling that limited the hours that they were allowed to.
So doesn't go through the night. It stops at 10 o'clock at night or something.
Starts at 7 a.m.
7 a.m. and 7:05, 7 a.m. to
10 p.m.
10 p.m.
Yeah.
So it's quite, I mean, they've reduced it.
Just on the hour, do they do the quarter hours, or is it? Yeah.
See,
I mean, if it's just like a bong, but maybe it's a bang, 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 bang. You know what I mean? It can be, there are some.
Well. Can I make the case? I mean, I'm so torn as I saw off now because I grew up in a small village. Church bells were an amazing part of it, but it should be real bell ringers. My 2 problems are it's been automated, so that it starts so early, and there's 122 clangs from 7 a.m. to 7:05.
What?
And that seems excessive.
Oh, that's extraordinary.
Yeah. So I love the church. I love the bells.
Over 100 clangs between 7 and 7:05.
It's a lot of clangs.
That's absurd.
I'm
right back in her corner now.
Yeah, Martin needs to move.
Daily Star now, and this the story rather is rather past its sell-by date. Nick, what's the Yellow Sticker Man?
Yes.
The new Supersize Me.
Yes, very Daily Star. Bloke regrets his choices after eating nothing but yellow sticker food for a week. We've all done it. I've said before on this station, I've eaten 6 sandwiches because they're all reduced. Maybe not 6, but when you base your meal.
Such a tart for those stickers. I go in the supermarket and there's anything that's like halved its price because it's full of maggots.
It can skew your eating choices somewhat, and this is what has happened to him. He says he regrets everything. He says he had a shameful tea where he used the bolognese as a soup and ate it with a reduced bread roll. I think that's fine, personally. But there was another one where someone got him something from Marks and Spencer, and he just said, "You get it for me." And he got him a child's portion of pasta, a chocolate mousse, a whole Madeira cake, and a prawn sandwich. So he says he's a nearly 30-year-old man eating a third of Madeira cake for breakfast and considering his life choices. And you
see, that's not the yellow stickers. That's just because he's got 3 out of 4 of those are from the sweet rack, aren't they? But my son is like that. If I give him a £5 to go and get himself some lunch from the co-op, he just comes out with a series of biscuits.
Well, it left him with, for example, having a sauce but no pasta to have it with. So it is flawed. But But he was trying to see also if he could get by with a universal credit budget. That's the other thing. And the answer is you better enjoy sauce on its own.
I think I could get through just on yellow sticker stuff, though, wouldn't you?
Yellow stickers, I'm a fan, but you have to do like a combo. Yellow stickers, the bit of Lidl's, other stores, the cheaper stores are available. Just like you do with your clothing, like you have cheap clothing with Primark, and then you mix it with brand. But of course, sadly, some people just don't have the option. They have just got to get those yellow stickers.
Well, we finished with, I think it's just quite a good story. It comes from the Daily Star, but it's actually quite academic and fascinating. Tutankhamun's dagger comes from space, apparently. Is this it's like a meteorite?
Yeah. Okay, so the Daily Star, guys. Tutankhamun's dagger came from space, says experts who are finally cracking the mystery. King Tutankhamun's dagger has apparently, I didn't know, but it's been baffling experts since it was discovered in 1922. As records show, the ancient
There's
Egyptians.
a picture of it. It's a very nice looking dagger, isn't it?
Actually, that's in good nick, isn't it? That is a really good nick. They say that iron didn't come into place until
they didn't iron that far back.
So 500
I think,
years after, yeah. So they're saying that it's probably back in 2016 they had research that said that the material probably came from a meteorite, which is what before I got to that bit I thought I bet it's
But
a
maybe
meteorite.
it could have been a gift from from some wise man or something.
I think it's this Atlantis theory. It's that civilizations were really advanced and it all died out, and only the primitive stuff survived. That's just my theory.
No, I love all that. His maps of Antarctica
it's not my theory. It's his
they
theory.
couldn't possibly have known about in the 1500s. He has a map that's about 600 years old that shows an accurate outline of the coastline of Antarctica, which was last visible to the naked eye 12,000 years ago. Ooh. Amazing. Folks, it's been an absolute pleasure. The news is challenging at the moment for those of a comedic sensibility, but I think we've managed to navigate our way through that.
Did our best.
Nick, are you back on again this week?
Hopefully. What day is it?
It's Monday today. I've got the rest of the week off. Sajila,
I'm back on Friday.
It'll be Dominic Frisby tomorrow, joined by Leo Kearse and somebody else. Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us. See you soon. Ta-da.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here.
Joe Biden walking out. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Tonight on Farage, it isn't going to plan. They haven't taken Kiev as quickly as they thought they would. Russian oligarchs are beginning to get worried about their lifestyles in the West as, across Switzerland and other countries, banks start freezing Russian assets. I'd ask, is this the beginning of the end for Vladimir Putin? We'll also talk about 500,000 refugees who've gone into Poland. What should the British government's response be? And defence spending is likely to become a bigger political issue. I'm certain of that. I'll be joined by Rear Admiral Chris Parry on Talking Pints. But before all of that, let's get the news.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. The top stories. Talks to reach an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine with Russia have ended, with the two sides agreeing to hold a second round of talks in the next few days. Earlier today, Ukraine's president signed a formal request to join the European Union, with Poland's foreign minister saying they'll support the accession process. Boris Johnson has told President Zelensky more UK support is on its way as shelling continues. The Ukrainian army has also released a video claiming to show the destruction of a Russian missile system. Well, the Foreign Secretary has told the Commons President Putin's invasion of Ukraine is not proceeding to plan. Liz Truss said the UK will impose further sanctions against Moscow and told MPs there'll be a full asset freeze on all Russian banks within days.
He expected to take cities quickly. He expected Ukraine to retreat, and he expected the West to be divided. Instead, his forces were met by the heroism of President Zelensky and the resolute determination of the Ukrainian people. He has been met by a united West, together with our friends around the world, and we have taken decisive action.
Well, this is all as at least 11 people were killed during rocket strikes by Russian forces in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. Earlier, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the violence is totally unacceptable and enough is enough.
Yesterday, Russian nuclear forces were put on high alert. This is a chilling development. The mere idea of a nuclear conflict is simply inconceivable. Nothing can justify the use of nuclear weapons.
Well, meanwhile, football's governing bodies, FIFA and UEFA, have suspended Russia from all competitions. It means they won't be participating in the World Cup this year in Qatar, while Russia's international football team has been ordered to play its matches under the name Football Union of Russia in neutral countries with no fans, flags or the national anthem. The United Nations Refugee Agency says 500,000 people have fled Ukraine since the incursion. It follows news that Britain's likely to follow the EU's lead in taking Ukrainian refugees for the next 3 years. The policy is due to be reviewed in the coming days. Well, on TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Faraj.
It is not going to plan, is it? No, Kiev hasn't fallen, there's fighting taking place, and the Russians are taking casualties. Whether it's as many as the 4,500 killed, as claimed by the Ukrainians, we'll find out all in good time. What is for certain is there is real, genuine Ukrainian resistance. It's quite noticeable that the people crossing the border into Poland, about 500,000 of them, are predominantly women and children. The men have stayed to fight. They're being led, I think very bravely, by President Zelensky, who's been there in the centre of Kiev. He hasn't run away. And one of the things that strikes me is perhaps one of the reasons that the army is not being as successful as Putin wanted, is that Russian soldiers are rather reluctant to kill their own Slavic cousins. And the tanks and the kit are clearly very old, quite easily taken out by some of the equipment, much of which I think we actually provided them. They've been running out of fuel, so there are logistical problems as well. And despite the United States of America being completely absent, and I say this because President Biden spent the weekend back at home in Delaware. If ever there was a time for an American leader to be in Europe, sitting around with the other NATO leaders, it was this weekend. And in terms of sanctions and everything else, the US, well, just following really the lead that comes from elsewhere. And yet, it does appear that the world really is beginning to unite. Even Germany, yes, even Germany are now actually going to help Ukraine. And I thought it was very significant today that Swiss banks are putting a freeze on Russian assets, on certain named people's Russian assets. The Swiss banks, of course, always completely independent in these matters. My feeling is this: oligarchs, but also many other wealthy Russians, they've had a great 25 years, able to make their money in Russia, able to get their money out of Russia, able to buy their houses in Chelsea, to send their kids to some of the best private schools in the world, to get their medicine from Harley Street, their super yachts in Monaco, Capri and elsewhere. They've had a fantastic life, but they're beginning to get a bit upset. Now, Lord Lebedev, of course, is a dual national. Lord Lebedev, who owns the Evening Standard, has come out today very clearly saying, President Putin, please stop this war. And my feeling is there'll be many others, many others, who are worried about their lifestyles, worried about Russia effectively becoming like North Korea, cut off from the rest of the world. And that will leave Putin only one place to go, and that's Beijing. I don't see the oligarchs particularly wanting to move to Beijing. Putin has completely overreached. He has miscalculated. We saw over the weekend growing street